The title of this can only be labeled Behind Locked Doors. Give this man satin undies, a dress, a sweater, and a skirt, or even the lounging outfit he has on, and he's the happiest individual in the world. He can work better, think better, he can play better, and he can be more of a credit to his community and his government because he is happy. These things are his comfort. But why the wig and makeup? He dares to enter the street dressed in the clothes he so much desires to wear, but only if he really appears female. The long hair, the makeup, the clothing, the actual contours of a girl. Most transvestites do not want to change their life, their bodies. Many of them simply want to change the clothing they wear to that is worn by the opposite sex.
A modern day remake of Matthew Vaughn's Lay a Kick, a Coen brothers end up with Timothy Chalamet. A Citizen Kane prequel, a Midnight Cowboy sequel, Alvin and the Chipmunks deserving of the squeak. There's so many new ways to revisit sideways, but a graphic novel is how we choose to update. But we still hold fast, you can't change the past on the Ruined Childhoods podcast.
In December 1992, Dr. Dre released his iconic album, The Chronic, which featured the hit single, Nothing But a G-Thang, which reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 list just behind Whitney Houston's cover of I Will Always Love You. Nothing But a G-Thang, which Dre recorded with Snoop Dogg while Snoop was still in prison, expresses the daily strifes of a G's romantic hardships. As many know, Dr. Dre and Snoop came along in the latter part of the golden age of hip-hop, alongside the likes of Ice Cube, Ice-T, Tupac Shakur, LL Cool J, and Will Smith. If you're not familiar with these names as musicians, you might know them from their acting roles, though Will Smith's filmography is the most robust both in terms of prolificness and critical clout. But aside from the roles that Smith is well known for, Ali in Ali, Hancock in Hancock, or Hitch in Hitch, Smith is also known for turning down some now iconic roles. He famously turned down Neo in The Matrix, and less famously Superman in Superman Returns, and Willy Wonka in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Smith was also supposed to appear as one half of the following on-screen duos. He and J-Lo were supposed to be the leads in A Star is Born. He and Woody Allen were allegedly supposed to star as conjoined twins in Stuck on You. And he and Nicolas Cage were supposed to star in I Now Pronounce You, Chuck and Larry, in the role that would go to Adam Sandler, who was coincidentally also up for the role of Willy Wonka. I Now Pronounce You, Chuck and Larry is one of Sandler's collaborations with director Dennis Dugan. Beginning with Happy Gilmore, they teamed up for the Grown Ups movies, You Don't Mess with the Zohan, Just Go With It, and 2011's Jack and Jill, in which Sandler plays a dual role of Jack and his twin sister, Jill. The film also starred Katie Holmes and Al Pacino in a memorable performance as himself. The film swept one particular award ceremony, the Golden Raspberries, an upsetting and callous award that calls out the worst of cinema. Jack and Jill won Razzies for Worst Picture, Dugan for Worst Director, Sandler for both Worst Actor and Actress, Pacino for Worst Supporting Actor, David Spade for Worst Supporting Actress, Worst Screenplay, Worst Screen Couple, Worst Screen Ensemble, and Worst Prequel, Remake, Ripoff, or Sequel, claiming that it is a take on this week's film. Greetings, Starfighters. This is Ruined Childhoods, and on this episode we're celebrating the 1953 queer cinema classic Glen or Glenda, written, starring, and directed by Edward D. Wood Jr., who, when it comes to B-movie history, is a real OG. Dan, was this your first time seeing Glen or Glenda?
It sure was, though at times it felt like I had seen it many times before because I've seen Ed Wood many times.
I was so amazed by how well Ed Wood captured, I guess, certain elements of the, production of Glen or Glenda, and watching the two of those in tandem is, what is such a treat. But Glen or Glenda is, I feel like, so much more than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, me too. Yeah. In many ways.
Yeah.
In many ways, it was beyond in almost every way it was beyond what I expected, because there are things that Ed Wood, the movie, the Tim Burton film, doesn't really do. What it does, Lugosi, just the shots that it recreates. I mean, I always have admired Ed Wood. It's always been a standout for me in the Tim Burton filmography.
I love it.
And I feel like after watching this, I definitely had a greater appreciation for Martin Landau's performance.
Oscar-winning performance.
Right, Oscar-winning, and I've kind of always been bitter about that because of how badly I wanted Samuel L. Jackson to win for Pulp Fiction.
That's fair. That's completely fair.
I was also a Pulp Fiction nut, and I don't know that I had seen Ed Wood by the time of the Oscars. I saw it on VHS.
Yeah.
So
I feel like when you and I were younger, and probably like, you know, when you were when you were like, you know, 17, and when I was 17, you were like a Tarantino guy, but when I was 17, I was like a Tim Burton guy. And this was before he went full like CGI and everything kind of seemed the same-ish, had the same sheen to it. Tim Burton's work I thought was just like truly groundbreaking and was really the director for me for a period of time.
Oh, well, I mean, Tim Burton was that director for me before Tarantino. Tim Burton was always, like since Batman.
Yeah, right.
And then like I had seen Beetlejuice and I'd seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure, but it wasn't until like Batman and Batman Returns when I was just like, dude, I am so into whatever this guy is doing.
Right, yeah.
Like, I love it. And like, I was a devoted Tim Burton fan for a long time. I would say like maybe starting with Batman and then what was the Sweeney Todd? I almost said Sleepy Hollow, but with Sleepy Hollow, I did. Interesting Sleepy Hollow story. Tangent.
Okay.
Very brief. Was I did not see Sleepy Hollow in the theater, though I had expected to with our brother. For those new to the podcast, John and I are brothers.
It's true.
And we have another brother, Scott, and Scott and I were going to the movies. I remember it was like winter break, 99 into 2000. And it was like, I think early January. And it showed that the Lowe's in Mountainside, New Jersey, where I've seen many a film, was playing Sleepy Hollow. So we were going to go because we were Tim Burton fans.
Right.
And especially like I also loved like Danny Elfman's scores. I had compilations and like scores of his on cassette and everything. So we went to the movies to see Sleepy Hollow, but it turns out that the newspaper, because again, this was 1999 into 2000, we were using the newspaper.
Sure were.
And the newspaper sometimes did not have the correct listings. And this was not, we didn't call Movie Phone or anything. We just looked in the paper and said, oh, like Sleepy Hollow's playing like 4:15 or whatever. So, all right, let's go. Like there's, it's been out for a couple of months.
Right.
No need to like get there super early. And it was not playing. We did end up seeing Any Given Sunday.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it was playing. It was like, this is playing. And it's like, all right, Oliver Stone's making a football movie with the aforementioned Al Pacino as a football coach, which made perfect sense. So. Well,
which he would go on to do later with Paterno.
Right. Well, different. Well, the coach in Any Given Sunday certainly overlooked his share of, safety violations. But anyway. So I was glad I saw that in the theater, but didn't see Sleepy Hollow in the theater. But like, I'm trying to think of any other Tim Burton movies that came out in that span that I did not go see. I feel like Dark Shadows was the first one where I was like, I don't need to go see that.
For me, it was Sleepy Hollow and Sweeney Todd. I just wasn't interested.
No.
But kind of circling back to what brings us to talking about Tim Burton is Ed Wood.
Right.
And I think that it was it was probably largely because of Ed Wood that I learned, the movie Ed Wood, that I learned about Ed Wood, the person, And I got really into I hadn't watched Glen or Glenda, but like Plan 9 for Outer Space, I just loved watching it. It was always so much fun, just, having fun watching a movie rather than having watching a movie to be like scared or feeling like certain emotions that movies try to get you to feel. It was more of just like, I'm having fun.
Right.
And I remember I must have been in 9th or 10th grade, I wore like a Plan 9 from Outer Space t-shirt a whole bunch. And I remember like some of the kids coming up to me looking at my shirt, and this one kid like making a comment about Bela Lugosi's name. And I was just like, Bela Lugosi's a legend, so whatever. and it's kind of, and it was cool watching the movie Ed Wood, and then of course Glen or Glenda, to see this latter age Bela Lugosi, somebody who had fallen from grace and had personal struggles that the movie Ed Wood goes into, and understanding the bond that Ed Wood and Bela Lugosi had together was really sweet. And reading more about the making of Ed Wood, it made a lot of sense, knowing that Tim Burton and Vincent Price had that kind of relationship. And, it almost just felt like honoring the tradition in a really fun, quirky way, because, Tim Burton, even though he was a studio filmmaker, was, bucking all the trends, and he was doing something his own way. And it's like, imagine what Ed Wood could have done if he had the money to do it.
Right. Yeah. I'm
just gonna say, because in Glen or Glenda, there were some things in there that I was like, my good, what is this movie that I'm watching?
Oh, I thought that way many times in many different circumstances
and in a positive way. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But I did feel several times, and I don't know if I wrote this down somewhere, but I really came away from it thinking like, man, if Ed Wood had been born, I don't know. At first I was like, had he been born, in like the early 2000s, and so that he could come of age and like, where anyone can make, like, I could pick up my phone, I can make a movie and I can edit it on my phone. And I'm like, holy shit, Ed Wood would have gone crazy with that.
Oh my God.
But I also think about like, what if Ed Wood had been hitting his 20s in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. And just been able to like be working when like during that age of like cinematic renegades, and people doing their own thing.
Right.
Rather than kind of the time he was, which was, you had to, if you were going to be a successful working director, you had to have things tight and polished, and generally like just get a contract with a studio and do whatever, like make TV, do whatever they have you do. Yeah.
I want to, before we get too much further, I want to acknowledge something really quickly, and then please continue. In this conversation about the movie Glen or Glenda, it is important to acknowledge Dan and I are, straight cisgender men. And we certainly can't speak to the experience of somebody like Ed Wood in terms of their gender identity. I have tried to do as much research as possible. There were a few podcasts I listened to. I want to call out the show Cruising the Movies, which is an IFC Center podcast with Elizabeth Parchell and KJ Shepard. And, they come to it from a very personal experience. And it's really wonderful to get an insider's perspective. And also with other things that I read, Glen or Glenda really is a highly regarded film in the transgender community. I mean, I don't think it's unfair to say that, even though it is quite a generalization, but the kind of the film historians who do come from a gender non-binary or trans background look at this movie as kind of like kind of like the Rosetta Stone of, you know, the trans focused movies to come. And I love that about it. And despite the fact that it is so low budget and it does rely on a lot of really corny methods and tactics to stretch it out to be the appropriate length,
Right.
You know, it still has the heart of a filmmaker who is expressing themselves and being really open and vulnerable. And just wanted to mention that before we got too much further.
Right. No, absolutely. And that's one of my, you know, definite reactions to this movie is that it, you know, regardless of the terminology and what may or may not be out of date, it is a movie about understanding and empathizing with non-binary people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like, just for my part, like, I, you know, having done work on my own and just thankfully having had people in my life who I have felt comfortable asking questions.
Sure. Right.
And hearing about their experience and like what it was like recognizing that they were transgender, that they were not the gender they were assigned at birth, which is, you know, the phrasing that we'll use here. And then just the last non sequitur, and then I can jump into the synopsis here. But total non sequitur. But during the intro, and you brought up Dennis Dugan.
Yeah.
And
Brain Donors director.
I did. Yeah. I mean, well, of course. And, you know, cast member of the movie Parenthood, one of the greatest ever.
Oh, yeah.
So, but also a cast member of a movie that I was watching last night.
Really?
And that I was like, oh, that's Dennis. Like, I think I'd seen his name in the credits, but I had like started it maybe a week ago. And then I went back to it last night. The Howling, 1981, Joe Dante. And yeah, Dennis Dugan has a supporting role in it. So the fact that his name, you start talking about him and I was like, wait a second. I'm like, I definitely watched him in something, but it was not at all relevant to anything we're really talking about tonight. But
that's really funny.
Who knew?
And before you synopsize, I want to add something to what we had been talking about. You and I will use, I guess, current vernacular that is appropriate to what's going on in the movie Glen or Glenda. However, if we do say certain words, it is only because they are the words that are used in the movie. And by that, I mean transvestite or transvestism, I think is one of the words. And also hermaphrodite.
Hermaphrodite.
Yeah.
I don't know if cross-dressing cross-dresser is really still.
Yeah. I think that's, I don't know the actual stance on it, but I don't hear it used, and I'm sure that's
I have heard
reason.
drag. I have heard drag used,
right?
Commonly,
but drag, drag, and please email me and tell me if I'm not right about this. ruinchildhoodspot@gmail.com. At least for me and my perception of drag is that it is, you know, somebody who identifies as one gender, who is for entertainment purposes kind of over embellishing by wearing the clothing most commonly worn by the other gender, and also adding, you know, certain, you know, like breasts and things like that but it's all about the performance and the showmanship rather than or the showwomanship rather than for comfort, showpersonship rather than for comfort, because I'm sure in a lot of cases it's not as comfortable.
You know, but I do feel like, you know, especially when you see drag performers performing, like, you know, it definitely is like, you know, it's not just like, oh, okay, like, hey, I'm good at this. But there is, I feel a sense of like, you know, yeah, this feels natural. This does feel comfortable.
Sure.
I'm sure
And-
it's not entirely comfortable.
Yeah, and I want to just quickly try and pull up some quotes from the movie To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. And
got it.
I am quoting, so please forgive any of the incorrect nature of what a lot of it says, because I feel like this quote, which at the time was probably the more preferred terminology, is already so outdated. And I mean, To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar is not a current movie by any means, but certainly more current than
30 years next year.
Glen or Glenda. That's right. So Wesley Snipes is saying, when a straight man puts on a dress and gets his sexual kicks, he is a transvestite. When a man is a woman trapped in a man's body and has a little operation, he is a transsexual, as we know. It's transgender. When a gay man has way too much fashion sense for one gender, he is a drag queen. And then, of course, it goes on. And when a tired little Latin boy puts on a dress, he's simply a boy in a dress. Referring to John Leguizamo's character.
Yes. Yes. Wow.
But that's
underrated Wesley Snipes performance.
Fantastic Wesley Snipes performance. I mean, I feel like all three of them do such a great job in To Wong Fu. I mean, not to mention all the, non-drag performing, actors in the film. Stockard Channing. It's a great film. I love
Chris
it.
Penn. Isn't Chris Penn in that?
Yeah, Robin Williams is in there.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Chris Penn is great in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
right.
That is to say, we are going to make sure to keep up with the common or the modern, the present day vernacular, which is in place for good reasons. And it's really incredible to see how far things have come with and granted, you and I live in, urban bubbles, but we do see that
Portland and Seattle.
So we are perhaps more exposed than other pockets of the country and perhaps the world, when it comes to exposure to those who do identify, differently in terms of their sexual identity. So that said, Dan, would you like to synopsize?
Yes, I would. After the body of a transgender woman is discovered dead in her home, investigators find a note explaining her hardships experiencing life as an individual assigned male at birth, but with an unwavering desire to walk through life as a woman. This leads the investigator to learn more about the life of someone who is trans to better understand their experience, resulting in a doctor telling the stories of two individuals. First, there's Anne, who was born Alan. After serving in World War II, Alan knew it was important to explore their true self and go through the process of gender-affirming surgery. The doctor also tells the story of Glen, a heterosexual man who doesn't feel comfortable in men's clothing, instead seeking the comfort of nylon nighties and Angora sweaters. Glen is also engaged to Barbara, who begins to suspect that there's another woman in Glen's life and has no idea how right and wrong she is. Will Glen tell her about his desire to cross-dress before their wedding, or wait until after they've walked the aisle to introduce Barbara to Glenda? Our greater story is also narrated by an omniscient voice who explains the mind of someone who feels they aren't born into the right body, in addition to the musings of a Hungarian scientist who may be the ultimate ruler, pulling the strings. So we've got Ed Wood as Glen. We've got Dolores Fuller as Barbara. And to put that in perspective for those who are more familiar with Ed Wood, so Johnny Depp and Sarah Jessica Parker, right, who both nailed it.
They really did.
Yeah. I mean, if you're expecting, don't be expecting to see exactly Sarah Jessica Parker, and although it's really trippy because with Lugosi, with the makeup they did on Landau and everything, it's like
they did a great job.
The same thing. It's brilliant. But wow.
Yeah, we also have Ed Wood regular Lyle Talbot as the investigator.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's a lot of other little performances in there. Certainly there are people who might not be credited because it's likely stock footage or taken from the cutting room floor or something else. I don't know.
Oh, there's so much stock footage, and I mean, okay, I don't know where do we begin? I'm looking at here. I feel like I should just read my notes.
Well, okay. Well, here's one thing that I want to talk about first, and that is not Bela Lugosi, but the narrator in general, because there are so many things that come up during this narration that are so fascinating to me. It's Ed Wood who's doing the narration, and clearly as the writer, these are his feelings. And by the way, I'm using his because Ed Wood never indicated any other pronoun usage. Nope. I don't believe that, they or them were used in that way at that time. And no. We, since Ed Wood died before ever really talking about, if perhaps they were trans or, whatever, it's not polite to speculate somebody else's gender identity. So, no. That said, hearing the things that this narrator says, it's all of Ed Wood's arguments about why it should be okay for an alleged heterosexual male to be not only just wearing women's clothing, but also why nobody should want to wear men's clothing. It doesn't make any sense. It's uncomfortable. When you get home from work, you want to relax like a woman does. They put on their, comfortable clothing and they don't have to wear these restrictive hats. And that's why men go bald, is because they're wearing such tight fitting hats. Right. Which is, right. I was just like, oh my God, this is so great. It's just somebody's diary being read aloud of just their thoughts about why the world is the way that it is. And there's so many great moments of also it's saying just well, now this seems weird, but when the airplane was invented, people thought that it was, why should we need to have an airplane? God didn't give us wings. We shouldn't be flying. All of that was so good.
It's all those voices. It's all the different voices that are doing it. It's not just him. There's all these voices saying these ridiculous lines I'm not going up in the air and that can.
Yeah.
It's so that's ridiculous. There's all the stock footage.
Well, you say ridiculous. It's ridiculous in the context of in any other movie, that kind of thing would be ridiculous. In this movie, it is so vulnerable. And
no, I don't mean the ideas are ridiculous.
Right. I didn't think
I meant the actual the dialogue that is said by the old people talking about the invention of cars and not understanding that and no those lines. But no, there's actually this movie when it's not doing that, it's far from ridiculous. The story opens with a suicide.
Right. Yeah.
Right. With a transgender woman who commits suicide because of how many times she's been arrested and harassed and attacked and just made to feel worthless. And I, watched that and just being, familiar with so many present day stories that are, similar to that, maybe not exactly, maybe not, the arrests, but still, that feeling of if who I am isn't natural, then I shouldn't exist. And that's such a terrible message.
Awful.
Such a terrible message for somebody to get. And yet, it continues. And we don't usually do. We are on the eve of an election here.
Right.
And like, let's be honest, the rights of transgender people are on this ballot.
Very much so.
And, you know, the right to seek out gender affirming surgery that, and I know I'm shouting into the echo chamber here, but this is a serious, I mean, through my wife knows somebody who is a surgeon that performs this type of surgery. He doesn't come into school, into the nurse's office during passing periods and perform. Like, no, there is a process. There is a, you know, like, you know, people are not just like, they are, I don't want to say coached through this, but they are like, and people who go through that process are people who they go through that process to be who they, at that point, like by the time they actually go into surgery, they know it is the right decision.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. And
Also,
to even entertain the notion that there's anything but, you know, a lot of deep consideration and thought and science that goes into this is just being willfully ignorant and, you know, like closing your eyes to the truth. Right.
And, yes, we are recording this on the eve of the election, but when this comes out, we likely will not even know the results. But I think it's also worth mentioning how upsetting it is to see how footage of Vice President Harris is being edited to make it look like she is saying that, oh yeah, everybody in prison is going to go get, a sex change, I think is kind of like what, just to kind of creep into the other side's vernacular. But, they're thinking.
Oh, they don't know what they.
Yeah. And just
when they say that Tim Walz loves transgender, and what is that? Like, come on. Anyway. You know, like, look, this is not coming out of nowhere. Knowingly that we were talking about this, I, you know, really was thinking about it a lot and just thinking about the young people I know who have gone through counseling and hormone treatments and, like, you know, years of discovering who they were and, you know, discovering who they are.
Right.
That anyone should be denied that and told that they are wrong about who they are and that's one of the things I appreciate about this movie is as you said, it's very genuine and it doesn't like it speaks very logically and it speaks very truthfully.
And I also want to say, I really appreciated that. And of course, this is all happening because the person who wrote and directed it is Ed Wood. But the character of the investigator going to this doctor to, not because he's like following up on like a lead or something, he's just going to understand. And it's just like, man, can you imagine if the cops actually did that?
Wasn't that mind blowing?
That was amazing. It's just like, oh, he's just sitting there and listening. That's amazing. And that's where we kind of hear these, and of course there are these stories that are, the stories of like Anne/Alan and Glen/Glenda are very, pulled from reality essentially. But of course the explanation, of why some people who, I guess are trans or non-binary can get gender affirming surgery versus when they can't is so perplexing and funny. And basically what they say is that there are people who are born, they say hermaphrodite. We know that it's intersex now. And if they are born with those anatomical organs as part of their body, then they can have the gender affirming surgery. But if they don't, then they can't. And we know that not to be true. Now, in 1953, certainly that wasn't, widely talked about. And of course, we have to talk about the genesis of this movie even happening, which is the widely publicized gender affirming surgery of Christine Jorgensen, which happened in Europe, but this is an American. And I think that the reason why it caught fire with the news is because a letter that she had written to her parents, I believe, was discovered by some newspapers, and then it just kind of spread like wildfire. And, Christine Jorgensen wasn't the first person to have gender affirming surgery, but was definitely the first to be talked about on a wide scale like this. And, I don't know as much as I'd like to know about Christine Jorgensen, but sounds like a really fascinating person and, a real trailblazer. And it's cool. Like, I remember watching clips of 70s, like game shows with where Betty White would always be on it and everything. And for one of the, it might've been like Hollywood Squares or something. And Betty White made a Christine Jorgensen reference. And it was just like, it was part of, culture. And that was already, 20 years after this had made any news at all. But, when this was all happening, that's when, and you see this all unfold in, Ed Wood, but, that was the impetus for the studio to just say, we're doing a movie that is based on Christine Jorgensen. And then, Ed Wood kind of turned it into his own thing. Which you do kind of understand why the producer, why George Weiss, gets pissed. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, imagine what, the Christine Jorgensen thing was big news, and it could have actually helped him a lot. Right. Totally. It actually been made that way. So I just threw into the Google, just got some important dates, or events in the history of gender affirming surgery. So just a few, because it's actually really interesting. The first modern sex reassignment surgery was performed in 1952. Oh, wow. So was that Christine Jorgensen? I mean, I didn't think that Christine Jorgensen was the first. There were experiments done with it in the 30s in Germany. Okay. Yeah. So, and this abstract that I'm looking at here does not seem to have the name of the person who was the surgery, but according to Wikipedia, she was the first person to become widely known in the United States for having sex reassignment surgery. Yeah, I mean, well, then it didn't. I mean, it says 1952, Danish plastic surgeon Paul Foch Andersen performs the first modern sex reassignment surgery. Okay. And then 1956, there was French gynecologist Dr. Georges Burton performs the first anterior pedicled penile skin flap inversion vaginoplasty. Okay. There you go. Try saying that 10 times fast. I'd rather not. This is a family podcast. It's not. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all scientific terms, though. So anyway, and with the whole 1930s German thing is interesting. Just we all know what was happening in the 30s in Germany. Yeah, I mean, also I read a book, listened to a book over the summer about basically how much meth they were producing and then taking, and how just the Nazis were on meth, right? Which was basically how they pulled off so many invasions, because when the other armies expected them to tire out and stop, they didn't.
Oh, they were tweaking so
Yeah.
much. They had like cocaine chewing gum and all that. Like they were tricked out. But I don't know what movie that is, but it hasn't been made yet. Back to Ed Wood.
Back to Glen or Glenda.
Yeah, or sorry, back to Glen and Glenda. So, just to talk about the other, just kind of like just to get the bonkers stuff out of the way.
Okay.
Just some things to bring up. So we, as alluded to earlier, there were a lot of scenes added to get to a full running time.
Mm-hmm.
A like feature length running time, and they were mostly like George Weiss exploitation, like S&M scenes.
Right. So there's this extended dream sequence, and yes, it is very exploitative and absolutely wild. And
Wow.
it was. I mean, you're almost kind of literally going into a different movie. And you know what, Dan? So much of that made me think about like Pee-wee's Big Adventure when he has his dream sequence with like the clowns and the hospital and everything. And it's like, that's gotta be where that comes from.
The part where he's getting married and there's like the devil there.
Exactly.
Right. That totally like Francis in the dream in the devil outfit. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because even though all of this was, and it's like at first it was like, what is going on here? But the longer it goes on, the more you start to think about it, and it might have had no narrative purpose whatsoever, but you're like, huh, so this is really about like, is this the man inside Glen trying to tame the woman inside Glen? Is this like, does he think that it's evil to be, well,
I imagine that for anybody going through this, especially in the 1950s, when there's, not much of a community to look to,
right?
All you have are the people who are telling you how wrong you are. And,
right.
For somebody like Glen, this is a big secret. And, keeping this secret, especially from somebody who's about to become his partner for life, is haunting him. And I feel like there were maybe some stretches that were taken in order for this to kind of work, and we're kind of having to do some mental gymnastics ourselves to make sense of it. But I think that's fine. And this is one of those movies where I think that it makes sense to understand the context in order to appreciate the content.
Well, yeah, definitely.
And it really, like, if you're watching this without any context, it's probably just complete dog shit. But if you're watching it with the knowledge of who Ed Wood was, and also just contextually what was going on at the time, and like, I hope that we come to a point in our history in the future. Yeah, it's come to some point in the future where the idea of people not being able to get or come out as being non-binary or transgender, I hope that we get to a point where like that's so normal that the idea that it ever wasn't is common is shocking. And this is it acts as a fascinating time capsule for people in the early 50s who did struggle with this. And it kind of normalizes things in a way, especially because we don't see anybody, with the exception of like the clerk at like the nightie store, kind of shunning anybody for, living their true lives.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's especially like the cop and the doctor who are like the authorities in this. I think that was a really cool choice to make, to have them be, treat this scientifically and for the cop to just want to understand it, to
Yeah.
say, to recognize that like this is a tragedy. It's a tragic
Sure.
death,
Yeah.
and that it's something that could have been prevented.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I was curious to know if you caught, and by the way, it's also during all of these fantasy sequences, they keep cutting back to Lugosi, who says the like beware, take care line like 25 times. So, and that just adds to it. But John, did you notice? So there were the shots of the soldiers storming the beach. Do you remember? It looks like it is stock footage from D-Day, but then I saw two things that made me say, no, wait a second. I think Ed Wood shot this somewhere in Southern California.
Okay.
Well, actually, I saw three things, because the palm trees were one.
Okay.
The others was that as they are, and here, I'm going to hold up this picture there to the camera.
Aid.
So as they are running up the beach, the other soldiers are just kind of standing there hanging out. Also, as they are running up the beach, there are two people who are nude and sunbathing on the beach who like get up, and you can see in this picture I took that there is a naked man standing there, and you can see it. I had to go back a few times to watch this, because I was like, wait a second, as they are storming the beach, are there like two people sitting on towels who are naked who just like get up as they're storming the beach and are just like, oh, I think we're in the way of something here. And I'm like, and is it, so I had to take the picture, and I have it on my phone as well. And I had to see, also because I watched the colorized version.
Right.
And yeah, sure enough.
Yeah.
So there is full frontal nudity.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I don't think these, I was like, oh my God, was he just like shooting at some nude beach because it was the only place where no one would pay any attention?
It would surprise me that he would have had the budget to have that many people in costumes be able to pull that off. So I wonder if it was just... But
he had, like, even if you look at he had, like, he fought in the war. I'm sure maybe some of other people in his crew fought in the war. They had the soldiers' uniforms. Remember, the costumes were good in the play that they do in Ed Wood.
Right. Yeah.
It's the only part of the review that's good.
Yeah.
Of that play. So because I thought the same thing. I was like, there's no way he could have done it, but also yet it's like I have no idea what then is happening, because there's like, I mean, like, is this stock footage from the storming of a beach where people were sunbathing in the nude?
That's very interesting. And, I didn't even catch it at all. How about that? Okay.
Yeah. Wow.
All right. Okay. So there are two, like, I guess, bigger things that I want to talk about. And, one of them is just Bela Lugosi in general. Do you want to go in that direction?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, what we see, especially in the movie Ed Wood, and who's to say exactly how accurate, that type of thing is, but it appears as if Ed is just happy to have Bella there, who might not even necessarily know what he's there for. And yes, of course, having some sort of Hungarian scientist in the movie mixing potions and talking about pulling the strings and things like that doesn't really make sense. But that's also where, like, the context comes in a different way, and you appreciate it for the admiration and the love that the filmmaker had for this person who was, cast out from Hollywood and, not doing great and, going through a lot of struggles of their own. And so I feel like also understanding that makes it make sense in a way.
Oh, well, because when you know, and when you're just like, oh man, he just like wanted to give his idol a job.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. When you're watching it, like if you're watching it and you have no idea what's going on, like if you're watching it at the time, you're just like, what is Bella Lugosi really?
Yeah.
He's still, I mean, they get it in the movie.
Yeah.
I have a feeling like like Ed Wood is pretty close. I have a feeling that they're pretty accurate about a lot. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I did read a few
feeling.
things about that came from Bela Lugosi's family. That was basically just like, no, that wasn't really the way that happened, or he wasn't like this in that particular scene. And also Ed Wood's family, went on to say like, they didn't talk about how he was like a big time alcoholic. And I mean, that's kind of how he died, is just he drank himself to death, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So my feeling wasn't really accurate.
But, of course, certain things are accurate, but who knows exactly what's going on. But
nailed the scenes from this and the pull the strings and everything.
Yeah.
Is so like it's exactly what you want to see.
But it makes sense. It makes Glen or Glenda make sense to come into it with that concept,
right?
And I really appreciate it for that. And yeah, I mean, Bela Lugosi, what a character. Yeah, very, very interesting. The one other thing that I really wanted to talk about was the ending of Glen's story. And I'm not going to sound the spoiler alert thing, because if you're watching this movie, it's not because you're dying to know what exactly happens with Glen. And if, so basically with the doctor, like he tells Barbara that he's going to, or that he dresses in women's clothing. And she accepts him, a scene that is beautifully recreated in Ed Wood.
Yeah.
And when they're at the doctor, he's basically explaining to Glen that what is probably happening is he had a childhood with a mother situation that wasn't fulfilling, and so he has kind of taken on this desire to appear as a woman, because it's more than his clothing. It's hair, it's the wig, and it's stuffing a bra to appear to have breasts. And but what this doctor is saying is like, you're doing that because you did not have this feminine energy from your mother, so it's got to go somewhere. And what he tells him to do is essentially like siphon all of that energy and like put it into Barbara, and she will take on Glenda, and she will be all of what Glenda is, so that you don't have to do that anymore. And that is a perplexing way to end this movie, especially considering, that Ed Wood likely doesn't believe that any of that is likely or true, unless he's trying to make sense of things for himself.
But I think that's it though. I think it's him telling himself what he needs to do, because even though this movie is acknowledging that that people can be non-binary and that people can be transgender, it's not necessarily saying that Glen is. And to bring it back to Ed Wood, we do get the Bill Murray's character Bunny is transgender, right? I believe is identifying as transgender, is getting a gender affirming surgery.
Well, is planning on it, but doesn't
talks
pan
about
out.
it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But still, like, is definitely leaning in that way. Whereas Ed is always talking about like definitely being heterosexual. And
they make it very clear in the narration that Glen is straight as they get.
Right. But it still makes me question that, even someone who wasn't afraid to go this far, maybe still, and like couldn't see that in themselves.
Sure. The concept of like, well, maybe I am supposed to be a woman, but a lesbian. And it's like, is that just a step, too far of a leap for somebody at that time?
Yeah. I think that's it. Especially somebody who's been, in, I guess in a much more like, I guess, masculine affirming world.
Right.
So it just makes me wonder, had Ed Wood come along at another time, where would he have found himself then? And how much of this is to convince himself that like, hey, this is what you're doing.
Right.
This is why you're doing it. That's an understandable reason. It has nothing to do with anything else. So just here you go. Like, get married.
Right.
To Barbara, to Dolores, whoever. and just like, there you go. This will all kind of resolve itself. And you think about how, you mentioned how he drank himself to death, and that's so common, alcohol and drugs, for people who don't feel like they're able to really become who they were truly meant to be.
Yeah, for sure.
We see it at the beginning. We have a suicide at the beginning.
Yeah.
So, which, alcohol and drug abuse is another, form of doing damage to yourself. So anyway.
Well, Dan, before we move along, do you have any other notes, things that you wanted to bring up?
I think my note page is a lot of questions about like, what is this happening? What is this? And I was like detailed in my notes so that I would remember like what I was talking about, so that's not just a whole bunch of like, what? WTF?
Right.
Come on here. But no. So just like some of there were like baby sound effects at the beginning that it's like, they're so hilarious.
It's it's really a fantastic snapshot of not just the view of, or the experience of somebody who is transgender, gender non-binary, or perhaps something different, but also it is a snapshot of low budget filmmaking in the early 50s. And, coming from somebody who will do whatever it takes to get a film made and to be a filmmaker. And for that, I mean, Ed Wood, what an incredible journey for somebody to take. And I'm glad for it.
And, John, in with that description, I feel like it segues well into my idea.
Yeah. What would you do?
So my idea involves another filmmaker and somebody who they want to make the movie. They want to make it on their terms, but they want to be recognized for that. None other than Bobby Bowfinger.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So this is because what are you like Ed Wood kind of did the whole, backstory of it. And I think that with the, just rise in awareness of what it means to be transgender and non-binary, and to, that there's a growing awareness, hopefully. I know we've both watched Will and Harper, the documentary that Will Ferrell and Harper Steele made, and I even questioned whether Harper Steele, who is a comedy writer, would be a good writer for this project that I've mapped out. But also like when I think about, okay, well, there's Harper Steele, I think about, well, how many other people are there out there, trans writers looking for, that opportunity to tell the story. But so basically Bobby Bowfinger, who is well-intentioned but misguided, he recognizes that in Glen or Glenda, there is he could remake Glen or Glenda, and it would be something to celebrate trans people and help them be seen. He doesn't exactly understand what it means, but he knows that people are trans and
there's a market for this.
Yes. So again, well-intentioned, but maybe a bit misguided. So he starts to he starts filming, and of course he's got to get his crew back together.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely need to have Christine Baranski back.
Oh, absolutely.
And he realizes, kind of once the wheels are set in motion, that it's a terrible idea.
Mm-hmm.
And he can't turn back. It's, similar to the original, but he realizes, whether he realizes it or he's told this or whatever, that he doesn't have any any people who identify as trans involved in the production of the film.
Okay.
And he kind of goes to seek out, the trans community and get to know people in the community and kind of figure out and get their help
mm-hmm.
in making the film. And he still makes the film, but basically he ends up more producing it, and these other these people that he's met basically make the film.
Okay.
And they make it, and they kind of do what Ed Wood did. Instead of making the Christine Jorgensen movie, he made Glen or Glenda, and now they take Glen and Glenda and they do make it a movie that makes the trans community feel seen and celebrated and understood.
Okay.
So that's the ultimate goal of that movie. And it just felt like Bowfinger was kind of the right vessel for that.
Well, Dan, I know that you're pretty much always thinking about Bowfinger, and so it makes sense that you would go in this direction.
I'm not always thinking about Bowfinger. I am always, though, KIT, keeping it together.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to show it to the Laker girls.
No. Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. I think it's a lot of fun. And, Glen or Glenda, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, is basically it is this touchstone for so many filmmakers to come, whether they are queer or not. It was incredibly inspirational. And of course, we talked about Tim Burton and Pee-wee's Big Adventure and the dream sequence. I mean, also David Lynch has gone on record talking about how this movie was influential for him, and just kind of amazing. And
I see it in Eraserhead.
Absolutely.
Total. I mean, I'm sure others there are other things as well.
Mulholland Drive.
Mulholland Drive, definitely,
for sure. Yeah. I mean, David Lynch, I could see how he would look at this and say, "What do you mean people think this is a bad movie?" This
it's a beautiful piece of art.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us into my idea for this, talking about a beautiful piece of art. When I was watching this, and especially during that dream sequence, I was just thinking, this would be really fun to see at an independent ballet. With a really, really fascinating narrative to it of, this inner struggle, and for a ballet troupe comprised of the queer community, this would be such an awesome way to kind of bring this to life. And the dream sequence did have just such great movement to it. And because it was pretty much silent, it just felt like a dance to me. And I just thought, how cool would it be to see like, you know, an independent, like queer dance group do a ballet of Glen or Glenda.
Wow, that would be really cool. I think that would really work.
I mean, you wouldn't have to have all the stuff about like Anne/Alan, and you know, you don't have to have all that stuff, but just the story of Glen and Glenda,
right?
You could do a lot with that.
Yeah, I agree. You could potentially, you know, combine, kind of like weave them more in together and have it. But
well, I don't even think that you need anything with like the doctor and the investigator. Like,
no, just have it be the dance between Glen and or Glenda and Barbara and.
Yeah, it's essentially setting up the story of Glen and, you know, going to looking longingly at the window display of a women's clothing store and attempting to purchase an item and getting dirty looks from the woman behind the counter and having this experience of like, I'm going to be married to this woman. Do I tell her? Do I not tell her? And, you know, since you wouldn't have dialogue to do that, to do it in these kind of like, you know, interior, these emotional dance moments of just kind of the emotions that Glen is having is, I think, a really fun path to go down.
Now, are you picturing two separate dancers as Glen and Glenda, or are you picturing a single dancer who is one half is Glen?
No, this is not the Big Top Pee Wee half man, half woman character.
Oh, that is not at all what I was thinking. I was actually, for some reason, I was thinking of like Prince's Gemini character from the Bat Dance video.
Oh my God.
Who's like half Batman, half Joker. But I don't know. The Big Top,
I think that it's all done, you know, it's one person, but it's all wardrobe and quick changes and things like that. And yeah.
That's cool.
And also, but of course, to set it in the 50s, it would be vital, you know, keep it in that era because, you know, the experience for somebody now is going to be different than Glen's experience in 53.
Right.
But anyway, if you're listening to this and you're just like, I've got a great idea, you can email us ruinchildhoodspod@gmail.com. We're on social media at ruinchildhoodspod. You can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, rate it on Spotify. Give us a comment on YouTube because we do this video. We got an interesting YouTube comment about our episode. You know, we're doing this series right now where we're going up and down the alphabet. It's a whole year of episodes, and clearly Glen or Glenda is our G episode. We're trying to be as alliterative as possible. Our C episode was CC and Company, a film starring Joe Namath as
CC.
Yeah, as CC rider. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But that's a motorcycle rider, which makes me think about this comment that we got referring to our last series, which was where we went through each of the 50 states plus Puerto Rico, which is a lovely, lovely place, and also Washington, D.C. And somebody left a comment about our Iowa episode on cold turkey and this must have been somebody who lived in Iowa at the time and nearby and knew that this piece of information. They wanted to know, because this movie starred Dick Van Dyke. They're just like, I wonder, do we know what happened with Dick Van Dyke's like Honda motorcycle that he bought from such and such Honda dealership when filming Cold Turkey? And I was just like, how does one even find out that information?
Oh, wow. I don't know, but I kind of want to know. I want to put someone on this.
When I saw that somebody left a comment on the Cold Turkey episode, I was like, damn, wow. You've really got to seek that one out.
That's fantastic, though.
Yeah,
And,
I love that.
well, that's kind of what we're hoping that maybe, hey, some Iowans are checking out the Iowa episodes, et cetera, and maybe even, checking out some of the other ones.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think is so cool about our YouTube viewers is that the discovery for things on YouTube, I think, is just so fascinating. YouTube it's a search engine, and for somebody who's just like, Cold Turkey was something that was a movie that they were around when it was filming in Iowa. To have like a personal experience that they want to share with people. And we've seen it before for people who are like extras in movies that we've done that like don't get talked about a lot. And that's something that I find really fun about the YouTube community. But anyway, that was the last series. The series that we're doing now is our Alphabet one. H is next. Dan, what is our H movie gonna be?
Why, for our H episode, because, 'tis the season, we are going Home for the Holidays with Holly Hunter.
Yes. The fact that it's quadruple H, considering Holly Hunter is the star, really looks up. Also, it's a Thanksgiving movie, so.
Yeah, it's a Thanksgiving movie. Thanksgiving is almost upon us. And so Home for the Holidays from 1995, directed by Jodie Foster.
Yeah.
And, of course, starring the great Holly Hunter. Also starring Anne Bancroft, Robert Downey Jr., Charles Durning, Steve Guttenberg, Claire Danes. Who's Dylan McDermott is in there.
Yeah, he's Leo Fish.
Austin Pendleton, David Strathairn.
Yeah.
So great ensemble cast for this holiday movie.
Holiday with a capital H.
Yep. Holiday.
Yeah.
As in Holly Hunter.
There you go. Well, Dan, I loved talking Glen or Glenda with you. I think it's so much fun. And as you're out there storming the beach and shooing away the nudists, I wish you a good journey.
Good journey.
Pull the strings.
Pull the strings.